Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Sunday School Review. This week's lesson is entitled Call to Explain and is taken from Acts, the 18th chapter, verses 1 through 8, verses 16 through 21, and verses 24 through 26. Remember that Luke is the author of this particular book, uh, and we are still dealing with the theme for this unit, which is the call of women. And this is the fourth lesson in this unit. There is one more lesson in this unit dealing with this same theme. In the first outline, uh, the first outline is uh, dealing with partners with Paul. And at this time, Paul is, let's read one. After these things, Paul departs from Athens and come to Corinth, uh, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born of Pontus, lately came from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all the Jews to depart from Rome, and came unto them. Okay, in verse 3. And because he was of the same craft, he abode with them and wrought, for by their occupation they were tent makers. So we see Paul being in Athens, and Athens was considered an intellectual center, intellectual place. Now he comes to Corinth. Now, Corinth in that day was like our Las Vegas, like Sin City. So he comes from an intellectual center now to Corinth, which, like, as I said, like Sin City. The difference between those two cities are like night and day. Okay, so he come to Corinth and he find Aquila and Priscilla. Now this is a husband and wife team, ministry team, a husband and wife ministry team. And Paul had a lot in common with them. Namely, they were Jews, and they were Christians, and they were tent makers. And it was customary that evangelists or missionaries, they had a trade that is so Paul was a tent maker by trade. So was Priscilla and Aquila. Now, in verse 2, tells us that they had been kicked out of Rome. They had been kicked out of Rome. And we're going to see later, as a matter of fact, in our last outline, they will return back to Rome. But at this particular time, they had been kicked out of Rome. And we also see that they had established a business. They had already established a tent making business. So instead of Paul having to start from scratch, he joined with them. And I see this lesson, I know the lesson title is called to explain. in last week's lesson was called to support. And I see this lesson also is similar. You can also call it a call to support. So Aquila and Priscilla lent support to Paul. So Paul is joined with them in the tent making business. So let's talk about a couple other things about this couple. First of all, as I said, they were tent makers. And anytime in the Bible you see them mentioned, they're always mentioned as a couple. And the third thing, 4 out of the 6 times that they are referred to, Priscilla's name is first. So since the focus is on women in the gospel, I guess one of the takeaway is that we see a woman as the lead in this ministry. As I said, 4 out of the 6 times that they are mentioned, Priscilla, the wife name, is mentioned first. And another thing, they travel with Paul. We're going to find that out in our lesson in verses 18 through 21 of our lesson. They were traveling companions of Paul. So they lend support in that way. And they were a blessing. They ministered to Paul. In other words, they were a blessing to him. Now, so let's go now to verse 18. Here, making disciples. And Paul, after this, tarried yet a good while, and then took his leave of the brethren, and sailed thence to Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila, having shorn his head in Caesarea, for he had a vow. And he came to Ephesus and left them there, but he himself entered into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. Now, as I said, they was traveling companion, and he now they settle in Ephesus. And verse 20, starting at verse 20, when they desired him to tarry longer with them, he consented not, and bade them farewell, saying, I must by all means keep this feast that cometh in Jerusalem, but I will return again unto you if God will. And he sailed to Ephesus. Sailed from Ephesus. And now we get to verse 24, and this section is titled, Making a Preacher. Now, a certain Jew named Apollos, born at Alexandria, an eloquent man and mighty in the scriptures, came to Ephesus. Okay, let's stop there and talk about Apollos for a minute. And Apollos, if you want to call it, he was a gifted individual. He had it. He was young, he was educated, and we also see he was from the great city of Alexandria. Now, Alexandria was known for the city center of knowledge, and it tells you he was eloquent and mighty in the scriptures. That is the Old Testament scriptures, however, because the New Testament had not been written at that time. So Alexander was a man, he was on fire. He was on fire for the Lord. And we go to verse 25. This man was instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in the spirit, and is on fire. He spake and taught diligently the things of the Lord, knowing only the baptism of John. So he was accurate in what he taught. He was accurate in what he taught. Let's go to verse 26. And he began to speak boldly in the synagogue, whom when Aquila and Priscilla had heard, they took unto him and expounded unto him the way of God more perfectly. So as I said, he was accurate in what he taught. He was eloquent, he was gifted, he was educated. But his message had some gaps in it. He had some gaps in his message because he knew only about the baptism of John. Now, I like the way at verse 26 puts this, and when I like the way Aquila and Priscilla handled this situation. Now, they recognized that Apollo was gifted. They recognized that he was gifted. And they took him aside, took him privately, and explained the gospel more perfectly. And we also have to give some of the credit to Apollo also, because he accepted the instructions, and by doing that, he became even more powerful in the scriptures. And the scripture bears it out that he was very eloquent, a very eloquent man, because over in Corinthians, it talks about there was some people, they were, and now this was based on carnality, however, Paul made sure of that, but people were saying, yeah, I'm of Paul and I'm of Apollos, and Paul, as I said, he said it straight. He said, I planted, Apollos watered, but God give the increase. So yes, Apollos was gifted. He was eloquent. But it's all about Christ. And Paul wanted them to know. So yes, Apollos, after being instructed by the husband and wife team, Priscilla and Aquila, he became even more powerful in the scriptures. And we go into our last outline, which is entitled Leaders with Legacy. And the subtitle is Assistant and Apostle. Now, as I said earlier, that Priscilla and Aquila, they were kicked out of Rome. Now they're back, because we go now to Romans, the 16th chapter, verses 3 and 4, and we see that the Priscilla and Aquila are now back at Rome. And this letter, Romans, was a letter that Paul wrote to the church at Rome. And since we are talking about women, since we are highlighting women, in verse, I believe it's verse 1 of this 16th chapter, which is not in our lesson. The lesson started with verse 3. and verse 1 of the 16th chapter, I believe it talks about the letter that was, that is Romans, was delivered to them by a female. Her name was Fifi, and she was also a Gentile. But we have Fifi in verse 1 delivering this letter, this letter to the church at Rome. Now, it's interesting in starting in verse 3, there are about 30 some people that are greeted in this letter. And if you note, the first person that is greeted here in verse 3, greet Priscilla and Aquila, my helpers in Jesus Christ. Out of all the 30 or so individuals that are greeted in this letter, Priscilla and Aquila are listed first. So and as I said, the idea here is that we have a successful husband and wife ministry team, that the wife is the leading this successful team. And also, the last point is that they are now back in Rome, and they are still working in the ministry. They have a church in their house, and Paul greets them, and when he says them greeting, that praying for them because they had my back, and because they've had my back, I will have their back. So we see in this lesson here is another lesson of faithful women in the ministry. We'd like to thank you for watching today. We ask you to join us next week for another edition of the Sunday School Review.